Greek architecture during Archaic period 750 BC to 500 BC. Archaic period refers to the early stages of a culture in history and archaeology. It is most usually used by art historians to refer to the time of creative growth in Greece. It was between 650 to 480 BC when the Persians sacked Athens. The Greek art became more naturalistic and less strictly stylized all throughout the Archaic era. These paintings progressed from geometric patterns to depictions of real beings. They were frequently served as an illustration for epic stories. The faces were animated in sculpture with distinctive archaic smile, and the bodies were depicted with an increasing awareness of human proportion and anatomy.
The 6 influences of architecture. First one is geography. We'll be talking about Greece. So Greece was a mainly mountainous landscape with the Pindus Mountains and Mount Olympus. It is surrounded by water on three sides by the Ionian Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Aegean Sea. It means that the Greek city-states of the archaic Greece were separated by mountains and water. Climate. Greece has a Mediterranean climate with mild and wet winters in the southern lowland and island regions and cold winters with strong snow in the mountain areas, while the central and northern regions have hot and dry summers. Geology. So the Greeks used mud bricks, wood, cane, stone, fire clay, tar, wick mortar as their materials in archaic period. Religion. Since it is archaic period, Greeks believe in polytheism. It is said that they believe in gods who were involved in all aspects of human life. Social and political. During their period, the city-states was governed by a minority by noblemen, which they called aristoi, which means the best, and they lead the people just like a king.
About 750 BCE, there began a period of consolidation of the diverse influences that had been entering Greek art at a rapid rate over the previous 100 years. It is known as the Archaic period. So it was an age of preoccupation with domestic troubles brought on by the new prosperity rather than an age of reaching out to other culture. During this period, the art of sculpture, vase painting, and bronze working reached a level of technical mastery and imaginative freedom that brought narrative action and even emotion under the command of figural representatives. So, out of extensive experimentation with the architectural innovations of the later 7th century, the classical Doric and Ionic orders were fully established and largely standardized. The temples were generally in the Doric style, but they often bore Ionic details. In their sculpture and architecture, the colonies were handicapped by the lack of local sources for fine white marble, and they relied more on painted and stucco limestone. The lack of marble, however, stimulated their production of major sculptural works in fire clay to a degree not much at home. So I'll discuss about the architecture, which are the structure, sculpture, and pottery during the period of Archaea. So Heracles and Apollo. So Heracles stealing the tripod of Apollo. So from the east pediment of the Sipnian treasure was made in marble, 530 BCE. So next is a gigantomachy. A gigantomachy scene depicted on the north frieze of Sipnian treasury, also made of marble, 530 BCE, and Sipnian treasury, Delphi, Greece. So the figures are carved in an archaic style and in high relief, and they are almost but not entirely free from the wog and the frieze. While the figures appear to be in motion with wide stances and arm open wide for battle, the majority of them stand with both feet flat on the ground. This inhibits the sense of motion given by the rest of their bodies. So, Sipnian treasury. So the Sipnian treasury was built for the polis of Sipnos. Sipnos is a city-state that occupied a Cycladic island. So the Sipnians had large gold and silver mines, from which they profited enormously. And they used the profit to erect their treasury at Delphi. So the treasury housed their gold and silver gifts to the god. The Sipnian treasury was the first structure built entirely from marble when it was erected in 530 BCE and was elaborately decorated. So the Athenian treasury. The Athenian treasury at Delphi was built between 510 and 480 BCE. It's to commemorate the Athenian victory over the Persians during the Battle of Marathon. So the metopes also display the development of archaic relief and temple decoration. The figures do not feel forced into their frame but instead begin to fill out of the scene. Most of the scenes consist of only two characters and few scenes, such as Heracles fighting the Syrian him, an enormous deer, display a new sense of ingenuity. The figure of Heracles breaks out of the frame and he leans on the hind's back, trying to catch it. Furthermore, the figures, unlike those on the Sipnian pediment, appear modeled from all sides as opposed to just frontally. Archaic period temple architecture. Doric order. The style of Greek temples is divided into three different and distinct orders, the earliest of which is the Doric order. These temples had columns that rested directly on the stylobate without a base. Their shafts were fluted with 20 parallel grooves that tapered to a sharp point. Mathematical scale. So all temples, however, were built on a mathematical scale and every aspect of them is related to one another through ratios. For instance, most Greek temples, except the earliest, follow the equation of 2x plus 1 equals y when determining the number of columns used in peripteral colonnade. In this equation, x stands for the number of columns across the front, the shorter end, while y designated the column down the sides. The number of columns used along the length of the temple was twice the number plus 1 the number of columns across the front. Due to these mathematical ratios, we are able to accurately reconstruct temples from small fragments. The first stone temples varied significantly as architects and engineers were forced to determine how to properly support a roof with such a wide span. Later, architects such as Ignetus and Callicrates, who designed the Parthenon, tweaked aspects of basic temple structure to better accommodate the cult style. Moving on to the sculpture in the Greek archaic period. Choroi, singular chorus, depicting idealized nude male youth were first seen during this period. Carved in the round, often from the marble, choroi are thought to be associated with Apollo. Many were found at his shrines and some even depict him. So choroi means male youth. Male youth. So a chorus is a statue standing nude youth that did not represent any one individual youth but the idea of youth. Used in archaic Greece as both a dedication to the gods in sanctuaries and as a grave monument. So early choroi figures share similarities with geometric and orientalizing sculpture, despite their larger scale. For instance, their hair is stylized and patterned, either held back with a headband or under a cap. The newer chorus strikes a Regenstans and his facial features are blank and expressionless. The body is slightly molded and the musculature is reliant on incised lines. The Chorus. The chorus figure of Croesus. It is an Athenian youth killed in battle. Still depicts a young man with an idealized body. This time too, the body's form shows realistic modeling. The muscles of the legs, abdomen, chest, and arms appear to actually exist and seem to function and work together. Croesus' hair, while still stylized, falls naturally over his neck and onto his back, unlike that of the New York chorus, which falls down stiffly and in a signal shape. The reddish appearance of his hair reminds the viewer that this sculpture were once painted. Archaic smile. It is a representation of the human mouth with slightly upturned corners, characteristic of early Greek sculpture produced before the 5th century BC. So, archaic smile was used by sculptors in archaic Greece, especially in the second quarter of the 6th century BCE, possibly to suggest that their subject was alive and infused with a sense of well-being. One of the most famous examples of the archaic smile is the Croesus chorus, and the Peplios court is another. So, Curwe's face also appears more naturalistic when compared to the earlier New York chorus. His cheeks are round and his chin bulbous. However, his smile seems out of place. This is the typical of this period is known as the archaic smile. It appears to have been added to infuse the sculpture with a sense of being alive and to add the sense of realism. So, ceramics in the Greek archaic period. First, the Francois vase, made by Cleitus and Ergotimo, Athenian black figure volute crater, 570 BC, Chiusi, Italy. So, one of the most famous early Athenian black figure pots is a large volute crater with a potter Ergotimos and painter Cleitus, known as Francois vase. The crater, named for the man who discovered it in the 19th century, depicts 270 figures on the 6th register that wrap around the crater. Unlike the monumental vases of the geometric period, this crater stands at 66 cm or 2.17 feet tall. The surface depicts various mythological scenes with many figures labeled by name. On one side of the crater's neck are scenes from the Caledonian boar hunt, in which several men and a powerful woman named Atalanta hunted and killed a monstrous boar sent by Artemis to terrorize the region of Caledon after the king offended her. The other side of depicts Theseus, who slew the Minotaur with Athenian youths and his wife Arene. Other register depict scenes of the Trojan War and Peleus with his son Achilles. The detail and skill demonstrate new styles of archaic-based painting, shifting away from the past century's animal motifs and geometric patterns. So next is the Achilles and Ajax. By Exekias, Achilles and Ajax playing a dice game. Athenian black figure amphora. 540 BCE to 530 BCE. Pulse, Italy. So, one example is an amphora that depicts the Greek warriors Achilles and Ajax playing dice. Both men are decorated with finely incised details, showing elaborate textile patterns and almost every hair in place. As they wait for the next battles with the Trojans, their game foreshadows their fate. The inscribed text allows the two figures to speak. Achilles has rolled a 4, while Ajax rolled a 3. Both men will die during the Trojan War, but Achilles dies a hero while Ajax is consistently considered second best, eventually committing suicide. So, the Francois vase and Achilles and Ajax are the example of black figure painting. What is black figure painting? Black figure painting, which derives its name from the black figures painted on red backgrounds, was developed by the Corinthians in the 7th century BC, and it became popular throughout the Greek world during the Archaic period. As painters became more confident working in the medium, human figures began to appear on vases, and painters and potters began signing their creation.
Now, going through the prominent individuals during the archaic period, we have artists, poets, and scientists. Majority of these individuals have contributed deeply to our history, especially in the field of literature, mathematics, and philosophy. The three well-known artists during the archaic period are Antokides, who introduced a new vase painting technique, the red figure painting, which became the most popular form of vase painting for centuries after the archaic period. The second one is Thespis, the first ever actor who spoke for individual characters in the poem. He is also the only actor in these dramas because multiple actors were not introduced until after the archaic period. The last one is Pisistratos, who is a ruler of Athens. He initiated building projects that refined temple architecture. Homer, a most well-known writer who produced two of the most iconic poems of all time, Iliad and Odyssey. It takes us through the journey of Odysseus, who struggled to find his way home after the Trojan War, battling against monsters and beasts. He is also noted to be one of the first historians to ever exist and describes the architecture of the past with incredible detail and writing. Some poets during the archaic period pushed against the norms and conventions with their poetry. Example of these poets are Sappho, the only known female poet during the archaic period. She composed poems about erotic love between women. Archilochus, who wrote about sex and drinking and fleeing battle to save his own skin. Theognis, who wrote about politics, and Phrynichus, who produced the first drama in historical topic. Another well-known poet and a lawgiver is Solon. He initiated revolutionary changes and produced written system of rules. He is going to be the father of Western law. Some of the scientists during the archaic period are also the famous mathematicians that are still known today. Anaximandros, he devised the theory of gravity. Xenophanes, who wrote about his discovery of fossils. Pythagoras, with the discovery of Pythagorean theorem. And Thales, who documented natural cycles and accurately guessed a solar eclipse. Lastly, we have Pythia, the Delphic oracle, a priestess who believed to be possessed by Apollo. She was consulted for public and private matters and produces prophecies that commands power over the lives of Greeks.